What's up, everybody? We're back with another fantasy football video. So in this video, we're going to be talking week 2 start-sit decisions, example trades, questions from fans that specifically commented that will be brought up in this video, and help get your roster set for week 2 so that you can win your matchup this week. So if you're interested in more content like this, please consider commenting, or subscribing to the channel. I make a lot of fantasy football content, but I also make quite a bit of other content as well. So if you're interested, please check out the description below. So before we get into the start-sit decisions, I want to talk real quick about updates throughout the week, as well as the Giants Washington football team game from a couple days ago. So real quick, I want to talk about that game. And one of the biggest takeaways I had from Washington is that Taylor Heinicke and Terry McLaurin have a lot of chemistry together. Looks like Terry McLaurin is becoming one of his preferred targets, and it's going to be a focal point of this team's offense as long as he's healthy. Terry McLaurin had 11 receptions, 107 yards, and a touchdown. So very good stats for you right there. And if we see more of that throughout the season, Terry McLaurin's value is going to go up. I think that there's going to be some game. So New York has a good run defense. They're a little bit weaker in their pass defense, so some of that I think is a little bit contributory to that. But still, Terry McLaurin has got a lot of value going forward. And I think I'm higher now than I was with Ryan Fitzpatrick on guys like Logan Thomas as well. Because Thomas I was a little cautious on with Ryan Fitzpatrick, especially relative to his ADP, because Fitzpatrick doesn't really preference tight ends as much as Alex Smith, who was primarily Washington's quarterback last year when Logan Thomas went off. But Thomas still has a pretty good role on this team and is getting involved. So he had 5 receptions, 45 yards. Nothing special, but it's, especially if you're in a PPR league, that's modest enough value to help you get by at your tight end position. So he's definitely going to be a factor to consider as the season goes along. Not as much a one-year wonder as I originally thought. Antonio Gibson, I'm not really too worried about him personally. I know he's not had a very good start to the season, especially after these 2 games. And if you go back to my video from Tuesday, I talked about buying low on him. I still think that's the case. Antonio Gibson has got a very large role in this offense. And again, New York has a very underrated run defense. So Washington is going to have better matchups going forward where they'll be able to run the ball more effectively. And Antonio Gibson, when he had some good runs yesterday. It's just a matter of, just the line setting him up in a position to be successful. And I think that will happen as the season goes along. I think he's still a good buy low candidate, especially after 2 poor performances in the first 2 weeks. I think you can get him for a pretty significant discount, personally. For New York, so one of my biggest takeaways from them is that Daniel Jones is a viable streaming option. So I talked about this a little bit in my video with him when I did my Giants preview, which was, you have to go back a couple months for that. But basically, for the Giants, I talked about how Daniel Jones could be an underrated fantasy streamer because of his rushing value. And we saw yesterday, he basically was their rush offense. He had 9 carries, 95 yards, and a touchdown. And he also would have had another touchdown, too, if not for a penalty, which was very much the fault of the receiver. Not a smart decision there. But if that had gone through, then Daniel Jones' numbers would have been even better. And also, Daniel Jones, I was impressed with his decision-making and his ability to not turn the ball over in that game. And if we see more of that going forward, I think Daniel Jones will be a very underrated stream option for you in games from time to time. He's going to have some poor games potentially on the schedule, but this is a very positive sign of progression for somebody like him. And then one of my other points that I want to make with the Giants, and this is kind of bleeding into my kicker point. So Gano, I believe he had 22 fantasy points with his performance on Thursday. It was insane. But the thing is that Gano is almost universally unrostered because, again, he's not one of those guys that you think of that shows up on these ADP draft boards. If you go through my kicker video where I talk about kickers, it's in the description below. I talk about how where you're getting kickers on the ADP it's not worth taking them any higher than the last round because frequently from year to year you see kickers, one, performing relatively similar to each other. That difference between the number 1 kicker over the last 3 years and the number 20 kicker over the last 3 years was only 3.2 points. If you want to see more specifics on that, check out the video. But then also, you're not guaranteed to get the best kickers from the draft board. You look at guys that are going higher like Justin Tucker and Harrison Butker. They were not the top kickers the last 2 weeks. I'm assuming that nobody beats Graham Gano's number from this week, which is going to be very difficult to do. Joey Sly was the number 1 kicker in week 1. He was not drafted for the most part. And Graham Gano for the Giants, who's most likely going to be the number 1 kicker for week 2, was also undrafted. So all that being said, it doesn't make sense to draft a kicker. So if you want to see more specifics on that, check out my video. But you should not be, if for those of you that are going to be doing drafts in the future, do not ever draft Justin Tucker in the 10th round or something like that, because you can wait for your kicker, get some flex positions to give you depth as the season goes along. I just bring this up because I've talked about it quite a bit, and it's been proven the way the last 2 weeks have gone this season. Other highlights from this week. So the big news is that Josh Jacobs is out for week 2. So Josh Jacobs against Pittsburgh, the prime guy that's being picked up right now is Peyton Barber. He is the more of the lack of better words, the bell cow running back who's very much the early downs, who's going to push the pile, potentially get some short yardage situations. That's going to be Peyton Barber's role. Kenyan Drake is more of the change of pace PPR back who's going to have, according to reports, they want to keep his role relatively the same. I personally don't really believe that because Peyton Barber is a significant downgrade from Josh Jacobs, and Kenyan Drake is significantly better than Peyton Barber. But I do think it's going to be split a little bit. So people are going to be trying to pick up Peyton Barber. I personally would not do that. I don't think there's a lot of opportunity for him, especially going up against Pittsburgh, which did very well against Buffalo's run defense, Buffalo's running game. So I personally don't really like Peyton Barber on the waivers. I think Kenyan Drake is going to have some value, though, because I think the Raiders are going to find themselves behind in this game, passing the ball a lot to the running back. So if you're in a PPR league, Drake will have a lot of value. And there's going to be a lot of questions about Drake as we go through this video from other scenario questions. And then I also want to talk about the 49ers running back. So I talked about Elijah Mitchell, the running back for San Francisco, how he was one of the top waiver wire projections. But I also talked about how I think there's potential that his performance in week 1 is relatively temporary because San Francisco loves to run a running back committee. They love to get different guys involved. They surprisingly sat Trey Sermon in week 1, but I would not personally be surprised at all if Kyle Shanahan plays Sermon more in week 2. I'm not saying he will, but you never know with somebody like Kyle Shanahan because he's consistently been doing this over the last few years. They also could get JaMychal Hasty involved. Jeff Wilson Jr. will be healthy soon and eventually. So Elijah Mitchell I like, but I think that some of the questions that I'm seeing in terms of who to start him against is a little bit extreme. So I will get into that as we go through as well. So now we go to the fan questions. And I'm going to, first of all, for those of you who commented, thank you for your support. And for those of you that do comment, I will shout you out for your support and answer your question in depth. So I want to start first with a question from Gabe. Thank you for your support. He was asking if he should start Jameis Winston or Aaron Rodgers in week 2. Winston is a very popular stream candidate, so I think that Winston has value in week 2. But personally, Aaron Rodgers up against Detroit Monday night, primetime game. There's a lot of questions about him going up against a bad pass defense. I really like Aaron Rodgers to bounce back in week 2. The other thing, too, is that just in general, when you have somebody on your roster like Aaron Rodgers who's got the ceiling of somebody who is one of the top, or last season put up the most points in fantasy football among all positions last year, you kind of are in a position where if you don't play him, then you're putting yourself at risk of not capitalizing on the value. And I know that it's a little bit contradictory because he only had about 1.5 points last week, but you still have to take your chances with somebody like that because that's going to be one of your heavy-hitting guys that's going to be giving you a lot of value. Jameis Winston is not bad, though, but personally I would go Aaron Rodgers given this matchup. Question from Living the Dream. Thank you for your support to the channel as well. He was asking if he should trade Jamar Chase and Kyle Pitts for Saquon Barkley. I'm assuming that you're in a 10 owner league or less, but I'm just based on the roster. But I asked him about his roster. He's got running backs is Derrick Henry, Miles Sanders, Ronald Jones, Leonard Fournette, and David Johnson. He also has Hawkinson as a tight end option. Wide receivers, he has DeAndre Hopkins, Justin Jefferson, Devonta Smith, Tyler Boyd, and Robbie Anderson as some examples. I think Terrence Marshall was another receiver, if I remember correctly. But I would recommend making the trade in that situation. And I know Saquon is another running back similar to Antonio Gibson that not had a good start to the season. A lot of people are down on him. But still, this is a guy who's got an incredible ceiling. And if you can buy low on somebody who not only one has the pass, more so than Antonio Gibson, Saquon Barkley has been an elite running back in fantasy football in the past and proven that he can be. So I know there's questions with his injuries and with the Giants in terms of if their offense is going to create a scheme for him and whatnot. But still, given the other running back options, Miles Sanders, Ronald Jones, Fournette, David Johnson, Saquon Barkley provides significantly more upside than any of those guys. And I would argue he almost gives you a better floor than most of those guys too. It's close between him and Miles Sanders, for example. But I would, especially since you're not giving up a running back, and you already are set at receiver. Chase, I think, could be good, but he's also playing with two other Bengals receivers who are going to be splitting receptions. Kyle Pitts, yeah, he's got potential, but you also have TJ Hawkinson, and you really don't need two tight ends. So I would recommend making that trade, and I believe you did, if I understand correctly. So I think that was a good trade for you. I know week 2 was probably not very encouraging, but I think things will get better for you as the season goes along, so just be patient. But thank you for your question. Another question from Fantasy Football Helper. So his question is determining who to start in a 6-team league, and 6-team is it's an intense game because you don't. It's not really as much an issue of rostering people as much as just making the start-sit decision, and that's a very difficult challenge. So I definitely can understand the stress of that, but he is deciding who to start between. He's mostly asking about Zeke Elliott, but his running back core is Alvin Kamara, David Montgomery, Zeke Elliott, and James Robinson. His wide receiver core is Devontae Adams, Marvin Jones, Allen Robinson, Cooper Kupp, and Devonta Smith. And he's trying to figure out who to start and sit and whether or not Zeke should be in the lineup specifically, especially because Zeke is another running back to start off poorly week 1. So Kamara and Montgomery, I think you have to play them. They've got great matchups, and they're both look great as well, just objectively in terms of their ability to run the ball. Definitely go them at your running back. Wide receivers, Devontae Adams, I think you have to pretty much start every week. So the next receiver I would take after that is Cooper Kupp. I think that Cooper Kupp has got, it's kind of similar to McLaurin. He's looking like he could potentially be the focal point of the Rams passing offense, and I like his involvement there as well. So I would go Cooper Kupp as your receiver. And then between Allen Robinson and Zeke, I would actually go Allen Robinson. There is a little bit of risk in that. The Bears could get up on the Bengals and then just end up running the ball a lot. But I think that Allen Robinson will get involved, and you will have a great matchup potential with him. Zeke Elliott, remember, they played the Chargers, or Washington played the Chargers last week, and they did a good job stopping Antonio Gibson. So Zeke Elliott, a little concerned about how he's going to do against that front seven that includes Joey Bosa, etc. Then a follow-up question is if he should consider trading Kelce for a package of other flex players and George Kittle, and my recommendation is definitely no. Kelce is in a total tier of his own for tight ends, and that's what you're going to want to try to do is trade Kittle and a pack on another like receiver for Travis Kelce. You don't want to be trading back down in that situation personally, unless it's an insane haul, but I would personally try to hold Kelce. Question from Ryan H. Thank you for your support as well. You've been commenting quite a bit, and I do appreciate your involvement in the channel too. So he had a question, and this goes back to my kicker strategy again. If you want to check out that kicker video, so the trick I always do with kickers is that, again, as I talked about, it's a total crapshoot of who is going to go off. A lot of times it's guys that are on waivers. Similar to Graham Gano. So what I personally do is that's the first position that I drop from my roster because ultimately the kicker, it's going to be very subjective who's going to have a good game. You can try to predict it, but ultimately it's very difficult to do. So when he was asking who he should pick up when in his waiver or drop in his waiver wires between Michael Pittman, Jacoby Meyers, Ronald Jones, Trey Sermon, but then he also had Jason Myers, the Seattle kicker. And my recommendation is drop the Seattle kicker because one, he didn't play that well in week 1. 2, he doesn't really give you a ton of upside long term throughout the season because he's going to perform relatively the same as a lot of other kickers. Whereas Elijah Mitchell having that additional running back, and then also other guys that you could drop. Pittman, I know he didn't have a good week, but he could have a better week too. Jacoby Myers, going to have some potential involvement. I would not drop Trey Sermon because I think he's going to have a greater role in the 49ers offense. And Ronald Jones, if anything happens to Fournette. So all those guys give you more value throughout the season than Jason Myers. So drop Jason Myers. Leave yourself without a kicker until Saturday. Then Saturday afternoon, you drop one of the flex players because one, you're basically holding all these players and you're seeing how the week develops. So if you have a Josh Jacobs injury and you had Peyton Barber, then that's going to give you some more value potentially as an example. But then the other thing too is that when you do drop that flex player, you're blocking everybody else in your league from getting him until after that week. So it's a way for you to essentially maximize the amount of flex players on your team because ultimately you're making the kicker expendable anyway, which is the way it should be. So it's a sneaky trick. If you want more specifics, check out that kicker video. But that's what I recommended to Ryan, and you did that. So now he's asking who to drop going into Sunday. And I would personally, of the receivers, of the players that he had listed, I would go Marquez Callaway. Callaway does have potential to go off, but I think that the Saints offense, from what I saw, outside of Alvin Kamara, it's going to be a lot of big play for so-and-so here. Not necessarily going to be the same every single week. So Callaway, I have a lot of concerns about his consistency, especially seeing how week 1 went. So I would personally drop Callaway. I don't really think it's going to be as... I would go him before any of your other running backs personally. Question from Mike. So Mike asked if he should trade Najee Harris and Ceedee Lamb for Jonathan Taylor and Terry McLaurin. And that's a tough trade decision. Personally, I would hold on to the Najee Harris, Ceedee Lamb group. And I know that's a little tough to say after Terry McLaurin's game the other day, but I think for me personally, it's the appeal of Najee Harris over Jonathan Taylor is why I did that. I think Jonathan Taylor, I think he could be a good player, but I'm just very concerned about how Carson Wentz is going to be limiting towards that offense. I think Najee Harris, though, and the other thing is Taylor is going to be splitting with Nyheim Hines quite a bit as well in terms of snaps and stuff. Najee Harris is pretty much locked in as the top running back for Pittsburgh and not really in much of a timeshare. So I would keep Najee Harris and Ceedee Lamb. Ceedee Lamb, I think, has also got great value going forward as long as Michael Gallup is out too. So hold on to them. I think that will be the better play long term. And then question from Lucy in the Sky. He is asking, he has Gronk and he's trying to trade for Kittle. And that's a definite yes. As I talked about in my buy low, sell high video, Gronk, I think, is definitely somebody that you want to sell high. George Kittle is a buy low for sure. Those were actually the two examples that I used. But Kittle, I think, will have better weeks as the season goes on, and it's better to try to see if you can flip somebody like Gronk for Kittle that will be more consistent for you throughout the season. And then if you get Kittle, then I think you might as well drop Cole Kmet and Jonnu Smith. I don't really think that they give you a lot of value. Fill those positions with extra running backs that will be potential handcuffs for you in case there's another just plethora of injuries like with the Ravens backfield, for example. Thank you for all of you who did comment. I do appreciate it. And now we will go to some other questions that I found on other sources to just basically give some hypothetical examples going into week 2. So this is another Elijah Mitchell question. So Julio Jones or Elijah Mitchell? And I think that's a little bit to the point where you're kind of, the guy's hype is getting like too high because Julio, he's got some consistency issues, especially over the last season. But going up against Seattle, I think that he will have a better game than he did in week 1. And I think Elijah Mitchell, ultimately, I think, remember, I think that, again, it could be a timeshare committee. That's definitely a concern. And then also Philadelphia did pretty well against Mike Davis. So I think that that will be a more difficult matchup for them than Detroit, for example. So I would personally start Julio in that situation. David Montgomery in a trade for Cooper Kupp because he needs receivers, and I would say no, because David Montgomery, I think, is going to be a running back you're going to want to keep. Cooper Kupp is appealing, but I think that there's potential that you could find some other guys like that as the season develops, or for a cheaper price than somebody like David Montgomery, for example. That's personally what I would do. Honestly, I think a good move is go after somebody like Michael Pittman. I think that would be a very good buy low player who could have a very similar role of being the focal point receiver for his team. Jared Cook or Mark Andrews. So Jared Cook is a popular stream. I did mention him in my stream video. But Mark Andrews going up against the Chiefs, I mean, this is still a top 5 potential tight end. And against Kansas, for Baltimore, their receiving core is banged up. It's going to be a high-scoring game against Kansas City, so I think Mark Andrews will have a good game. Jared Cook could have a good game, and I think there's potential that he could. But again, guys, there's also Donald Parham Jr., the other tight end, who could get involved. Cook would not be surprised if he just bombed this week. I don't think it will happen, but still, I think I would just go with the consistency of Mark Andrews in a good matchup. Question of who to start between Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Kenyan Drake, or Tyson Williams. So Clyde Edwards-Helaire I would go with in that situation because I think going to have involvement against Baltimore, going to be high-scoring Kansas City offense. I'd go with the upside of Clyde Edwards-Helaire over those other guys. Tyson Williams, too. The only reason I didn't go him is because they're in a timeshare with him and Latavius Murray, and maybe Devonta Freeman will get involved as well. So Tyson Williams could have a good game, but I think I'd rather go somebody who's getting all the carries for their backfield and Clyde Edwards-Helaire. And then 3, I would go Kenyan Drake. Drake, I think if you're in a PPR league, I would bump him up to number 2. But I think it's going to be difficult going up against Pittsburgh is generally what I'm trying to say compared to those other 2 guys. I would, in a standard league, go Williams and Edwards-Helaire over Drake. Mike, so this commenter, this question. So he was asking Mike Williams, should he play him if he's also got Austin Eckler in his lineup? The other receivers are Tyler Boyd, Marvin Jones, Sammy Watkins, and in that case, I would play Mike Williams. Got a lot of upside going up against Dallas. Possible number 2 is Sammy Watkins against Kansas City, and again, banged up receiving core for Baltimore. But Sammy Watkins is just so inconsistent, I personally would not want to start him at all. That's just me. And then half-point PPR, what running back to start between Kenneth Gainwell, Trey Sermon, or Latavius Murray? Latavius Murray is who I would start in that situation. It got to have the most involvement probably, and then I would say next Gainwell, 3 Sermon, because again we'll see what happens with Sermon in the ever confusing Kyle Shanahan backfield. Kenyan Drake or Elijah Mitchell. So the two players that we talked about as guys with their stock rising, and in this situation, I would go Kenyan Drake because I think Kenyan Drake is going to have more involvement in relative to the backfield situation. Elijah Mitchell, I think, could still split his touches. Kenyan Drake is going to split to a degree with Peyton Barber, but especially in PPR, he's going to have a lot of value there. Myles Gaskin or Tyshawn Williams. I would go Myles Gaskin this is a PPR league too, especially PPR. Go Myles Gaskin. He's a great PPR back. Tyshawn Williams splitting touches like Gaskin, but Gaskin specializes in the pass catching, so go with him. All right, so Saquon Barkley trade. Another question: should I trade Darrell Henderson for Saquon Barkley? And definitely do that. Darrell Henderson has not really shown a ton of upside so far in the league. Not anything close to Barkley. And then 2, when Sony Michel gets healthy, supposedly it's going to be more of a committee. So again, Barkley is not in any kind of committee even when he's healthy. So I would definitely take Barkley even if he started the season slow over Darrell Henderson. All right, PPR league, Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Mike Williams, or Jamar Chase. So in the order, I would go Mike Williams, great matchup. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, good matchup, but again, going to need... He's also got Travis Kelce and Tyreek Hill to go up against him. 3, I'd go Jamar Chase. Again, 3 Bengals receivers. Another question. So, Javonte Williams, Laviska Shenault, or Jacoby Meyers? So, that's a tough one. In a PPR league, I would go Laviska Shenault. But in a standard league, I would go Javonte Williams going up against the Jacksonville defense. They're going to have a lot of opportunity to run the ball. I think he'll have a good standard game. But still, Laviska Shenault in PPR personally. Javonte is still going to be splitting with Melvin Gordon. We'll see how that goes. Another question of 2 players to start among this group of 4. You have Marquise Brown, Kenyan Drake, James Conner, and Christian Kirk. So Kenyan Drake, 1, I would go with him. Talked about him a little bit already. So among the other players, I would go Marquise Brown 2, given the matchup with Kansas City. Could have some good explosive gains, but Marquise Brown, very risky. Tends to have some up and down performances. But then I would go Christian Kirk. But Christian Kirk is even more inconsistent than Brown. And then 4, I would go Connor because I think Connor, in general, just has very limited upside in my opinion. Other question, Brandon Cooks or Darrell Henderson? I would go Brandon Cooks. Best receiver in Houston, especially PPR, I would definitely take Cooks. They're going to be playing from behind in this game too, in my opinion. Tannehill or Bridgewater? So I would go Tannehill because I think Bridgewater going up against Jacksonville, I would not be surprised at all if Denver gets ahead and they just run the ball and Bridgewater has a very modest game with not a lot of value. Tannehill, I think, will have to pass a lot in order to keep up with Russell Wilson. I would definitely go Ryan Tannehill in that situation. Julio Jones or Chase Claypool? I would go Julio Jones. Chase Claypool is splitting with 3 receivers, and he also was banged up a little bit last week. He's got potential, but I would personally rather go Julio Jones at this point. And then Claypool or Noah Fant? Fant is a good long-term potential investment with Jerry Jeudy's injury, but I would go Chase Claypool this week because, again, Jacksonville might fall behind by a lot, and there won't really be a need to throw the ball. So Fant could have a good game, but he also could very well bust, and I would rather go the consistency of Claypool. Brandon Cooks or Kareem Hunt in a standard league, go Kareem Hunt. Especially same game, but Hunt is got a higher potential for touchdowns, which is more important for standard than Brandon Cooks, in my opinion. Cole Beasley or Tyler Boyd? I would definitely go Cole Beasley in this situation. Beasley, very underrated value, especially if you're in a PPR league. Clyde Edwards-Helaire, Miles Sanders. Clyde Edwards-Helaire. Miles Sanders has got San Francisco's defense which is going to be a little more challenging in my opinion. Yeah. So Tyson Williams, T. Higgins, or Corey Davis. That is another tough one. So in a PPR league, I would go Corey Davis because gonna have a good role with Zach Wilson, a good involvement with Zach Wilson. But again, going up against the Patriots, he might not necessarily get the touchdowns you need for standard. So for standard leagues, I go Tyson Williams. For PPR leagues, I would go Corey Davis. All right, this is a trade question. So would you trade Deebo Samuel and Gronk for Robert Woods and Kyle Pitts? So Samuel and Gronk are both good potential sell high candidates. I just don't know if I like the return for those guys. I think Kyle Pitts is for Gronk. That's a good trade, but Deebo for Robert Woods. Robert Woods, he doesn't have the upside of some of the guys like Deebo potentially could have. If this was for Cooper Kupp, I would do that, but Robert Woods, I think, is kind of more falling into that secondary receiver role. So I would maybe consider it. I think if that's like a hard and fast option, and especially if your priority is improving tight end, I would do that. But it's definitely one I would sit on to think about and try to get some more options. Bryan Edwards or Tim Patrick? So tough question because Bryan Edwards played well, but it was only in the last few minutes of the Raiders game last week. But I would personally still go him over Tim Patrick. I think Tim Patrick is just a very modest player that doesn't really give you a lot of upside personally. Deontay Johnson or Calvin Ridley? So Calvin Ridley played poorly last week, but this is the top receiver on Atlanta. They're going up against Tampa Bay, which is if there's a weak point in this defense, it's their passing game, and they're going to need to throw a lot because they're going to be down. I like Calvin Ridley having a bounce-back week. So, pick 3 wide receivers, pick 2 running backs. You got DeAndre Hopkins, Chris Godwin, Adam Thielen, Juju Smith-Schuster, and Jarvis Landry for the receivers. And then for the running backs, you have James Robinson, Melvin Gordon, Austin Eckler, and Kenyan Drake. So the receivers, Hopkins and Thielen of that group are just basically automatic. The running backs that are automatic is Austin Eckler. Of the next running backs, I would go Drake, given the, especially if this is a PPR league, getting the consistency of targets. And then I would get Jarvis Landry as your last flex position to fill. And then the last question that I have is, again, be careful with your Elijah Mitchell overestimating. Elijah Mitchell or Mike Williams? And Mike Williams, I think, is going to have some good matchup potential against Dallas. I would personally go Mike Williams over Elijah Mitchell in this situation. So that's all I got for this video. Good luck with your Week 2 start-sit decisions. If you have any questions or concerns, comment in this video and I will try to answer you. I won't be able to put out another video by the time Sunday's game starts, but if you comment, I will try my best to answer your question before that point. So thank you guys for watching, and hope to see you guys next time. Bye.